Good? All right. Welcome everyone. This is the third family tree gathering that we have had. This is December 21st, 2014. The focus of today's meeting is to interview Grandma and Grandpa, Grandma Elaine and Grandpa Holbrook, about basically stories, things that they've, past events that can be humorous, that can be inspirational, anything else of the sort. It's a very open discussion kind of interview for this, but we hope it'll be fun and we hope you enjoy it. All right.
Well, we hope that you think of some things that will trigger memory in our part too.
We'll do our best. Okay. Well, Grandma, how about you get started with your story?
I was pregnant with Andrea. I knew it was going to be a little girl. And I thought, all four of my girls are so different in every way. And I remember thinking, so when Andrea comes, she's going to be like one of those three because they're three different kinds and that's all there are. Well, that's not right. She came and she was definitely different than all three of them. She was always very competitive, but in a nice way. And so I remember when the school decided to check everyone's eyes. And so Andrea was just 5 or 6 and she went up to get her eyes checked. And on the way home, and she's very myopic, which we didn't know. And so then on the way home, I probably shouldn't, but I said to her, Andrea, I didn't realize you couldn't read the board any better than that. And she said, you mean they were testing me? Well, you should have told me and I would have tried harder.
But really, I was blind as a bat even back then.
It's true.
Trying harder wouldn't have done one bit of good.
And for an inspirational story, you know, at the night of the flood, the ward had the men out at different places waiting for that.
Could you give a little bit of background for that, just for the sake of explaining to people who don't know?
Oh, in '83 there was a mudslide. Do you want to explain that?
Yes. You know the creek that's right beside of us here? Okay. There's a big landfill on 1300 East. There's a landfill. And it got so saturated in the canyon that the canyon collapsed. The canyon just collapsed. And built up behind that big, it was a really high landfill. And it built up behind that, and then it gave way.
Now you should tell that it had been a big winter and a sudden thaw.
Yeah, well, yeah, big winter, sudden thaw, and so everything was saturated. And of course when it caved in, it caved into a creek, which was really flowing. And when it hit 13th East, it built up, and then 13th East gave way. That big landfill gave way. But it's where the creek went under. So they said, I did never see it, but they said the wall of mud was about 20 feet high. But what it did was follow the creek bed down. Well, in one house up here, it hit the corner of the house and just turned it on a brick home, just turned it on the foundation. But when it got to 8th East up here, then it hit 8th East, of course, and the culvert under there no way would take this big mudslide. So when it hit 8th East, just southeast of us, it split, and part of it went over 8th East and back into the channel, and the other half took off, and up here is an underground reservoir, and it's abandoned now, but it was just in lawn. And the other came across that, the path of least resistance was across that reservoir.
Okay.
But what the reservoir did on the distance it was coming, it came into our backyard. Came in right across up here. The corner of our lot is just below the reservoir.
Okay.
And it came across our yard, this big wall of mud. And we were in here and we heard the fence breaking. We heard the fence breaking up. And then all at once...
This is about midnight, right?
Yeah, it was 11:30 at night. And the wall of mud had hit a substation up there, so electricity was out. And so we were down here with flashlights and candles, whatever have you. But anyway, it came across, and then it came right through our backyard, and then like our neighbors each side of us, they got maybe 10 or 12 inches in their basement, but we got hit head on with that mudslide. And our basement filled in 20 minutes. It was clear, the mud was up to the top of the steps, just over 20 minutes.
Wow.
And so that was the mudslide we talk about, and so that was on about the 30th of May, something like that. And we finally got back in the house just before Thanksgiving. Remember that?
Wow.
But anyway, that's the mudslide that happened. And so everything that was lost everything in the basement was lost. And our food storage was down the basement. And it all came floating up in the mud. So we lost everything, but the thing you really lost was books, photographs, all of your history stuff from that point back was gone. So that was the big thing. So we got hit, and the police came by and told us that we had to vacate, and that they would let us back at 6:30 the next morning. So we went up to Elaine's sister's and bedded down for the night. Came back at 6:30 in the morning, and we had the mud flowing through the house. This back door open, so the mud would flow through the house, and the backyard was just, even with the top of the wall, was just solid.
Oh,
About
wow.
what, 4 feet high. It was just solid mud back to the wall, and then of course on top of that was rocks and debris and what have you, and so on. But that's kind of a quick history of that.
Well, you should mention too that you got injured trying to get away. You fell on a nail.
Oh, yeah. I tried to get across the street out here, and I got hit with a wall of mud, and I went down, and a big nail went right into my knee. And so I got up, and I had this nail in the knee, and the board through which the nail had been driven, that was hanging down my leg, and the nail was in my knee, and so I had to go to the hospital, and but we went down through West Bountiful and
through Centerville and down through West Bountiful.
Yeah, West Bountiful and all to get over to the hospital even. And
Just 2 blocks away.
Yeah, and so anyway, that was the mudslide of '83, and we had a piano down there, and they just had to chop it up to get it out. our sofa that was down there was tipped upside down and was through the ceiling. And so on, but anyway.
And in one of the rooms down there was all of Lisa's mission preparation.
Okay, and that's the story I was
That's
gonna
what
tell you
I
about
was
Lisa.
Yeah, you tell
That
about
night,
it.
the ward had been out at different places watching for that. They were afraid it was gonna break through. And so the men were at different spots. And Dean and I decided to take hot tomato juice around to them, because it was raining that night anyway, and it was cold. And Lisa wanted to go to bed. And we kind of said to her, because she was headed out to Australia 5 days later. And we kind of said, no, we want you to see what it's like when the Relief Society's at work, because you don't know what kind of a emergency you might have to experience in Australia. So it's a good thing that she was upstairs with us. Had she been down in her bed, which she wanted to do, the first place the mud went through was through the window, which was just above where her head would have been. And it would have hit her so hard and so fast. And had the door been closed, she could not have opened it, because that mud was just like glue. And so she would have been gone. And like David said, all of her scriptures, she'd shop so carefully and mix-matched all of her clothes, and she did everything so perfectly, and it was all gone. So she had to go shopping the next day in her bare feet, in her Levi's, because that's all she had, and with one of her.
Up to Provo to
She came down
Andrea's.
to our house.
Because she couldn't get anywhere in Salt Lake.
Oh, did she?
She went to Provo.
Yeah, she came to our house.
Andrea went shopping with her.
Yeah, 'cause Salt Lake streets were all flooded too. And I think you should tell about her farewell too, and the national news was coming.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
So
let
she-
her
she
tell.
was- oh, no, go ahead,
No,
you talk about it.
You tell it, I don't remember it.
Well,
I don't.
her farewell, what day did this happen? Was it a Sunday?
It was a Sunday
And
night.
the next Sunday was to be her farewell. But the ward was in chaos. And so we all went, the bishop said she could have 10 minutes. And so the ward was all there in their work clothes, and we were just to give her 10 minutes and take the sacrament and then go home and start digging out again. But she gave a beautiful talk.
But wasn't the national news there?
Oh, yeah.
I thought national news was even there.
Yeah,
At
they
the
were on-
farewell?
Uh-huh.
Whoa.
In fact, she was quoted in the newspapers, and it was the one quote about,
We will prevail.
yeah, I was gonna say it had
We'll
prevail.
not only survive, we will prevail.
Lisa's good at those little turns of
She is.
phrases.
Yeah, she is good.
And the opening song was How Firm a Foundation.
And firm as the mountains around us is the closing song, right?
I'm
Very
Strength of the
apropos.
hills.
Right.
I might just quickly, to make a record of it on this, is what they had you do to clean up, I thought was interesting. And also, there was a kitchen set up in a carport up the street for everybody working on the flood and everything. That's where you'd go get a bite to eat and so on. And the Red Cross had set that up.
That was in Mick Tuttle's
Yeah.
carport.
Yeah. But, yeah, Merrill Tuttle's carports, you that know Merrill. But what you had to do was get the mud, of course, out of the basement. And to do that, when the mud settled, then you had about a 2 feet of water on the top, and the mud settled. So once you got that pumped out, then you had to liquefy the mud to get it out. So it would just go out to into the front yard, and then there were people with snow shovels out there. They'd shovel it down to the street, and the National Guard would come around with a loader and pick it up every so often and cart it off. And then there was a bucket brigade but that was on Sunday. This all happened on Saturday night. And the next day, they canceled church and everything, except for sacrament meeting. And everybody had sacrament meeting in the morning, and then everybody reported at the stake office. And we had 50 people assigned to our house that Sunday afternoon. And then as they liquefied the mud, they would bucket it out. It was just bucketed out. And so the people were just lined up, and the empty buckets would come in, and the filled ones would go out. And then every so often they'd trade sides so that they had a chance at both the empty and the full ones. But after you got the basement all cleaned out, and that took about 2 weeks really to get it cleaned out. Then you called the fire department, and the fire department came up with their high pressure hose, hooked it up, and they washed out your basement. And then they had the sewer open at that time. The sewer, of course, was plugged up, but they had it open. And so the fire department came in and washed out the basement. And then you had to wash down the walls with push brooms. And what it was heavily, it was not straight Clorox, but it was pretty heavy, not diluted very much. And that's what you wash down the walls with to kill all the bacteria and so on. So that's the way it went. And then we started doing what we needed to clean up the yard and the rest of the house. And then one day, about, what would it be, week later, 10 days after it was cleaned out, we walked in that one morning, and the flooring, the tongue and groove flooring, was like this, but it was still together. It didn't come out of the grooves, but it was just wavy like that. So all the flooring had to go, and a lot of things. And so, I thought it was interesting on what they had you do, and it was the Red Cross that gave you the formula to get your house cleaned out.
One story I remember, there was the other way they got it out was the sludge pump.
Yeah.
And we had a big sludge pump going on. That's kind of what I spent several days doing.
That's right.
Have the hose down there, liquefying it, and then getting the sludge pump out. And I remember getting down into the bathroom and finding a toothbrush, and I just went up and said, "Everything's okay, Dean, I found your toothbrush." So.
That's right. That's right. And you know, it's people like Charles that got us through this. Got us through this thing.
Well, the thing I remember is that to show the force of the mud, there was a file cabinet in Lisa's bedroom. And the mud picked that up and jammed it into the doorway sideways. And it took some real muscle power to get that moved. I couldn't move it myself.
And her bedroom set was Thomasville, so it was good, and it was heavy furniture, and it was clear up to the ceiling.
Yeah, that file cabinet was not on the ground, it was up in the air.
And then the file cabinets too, the force of that mud, the mud got in, and the time we got the file cabinets open, everything is just like you glued all the pages together, and you know, all the papers and everything. So there's nothing you could save. But anyway, it was an experience. And then later on, the Ensign did an article on Elaine and I and our family, and if you'll all remember that, the Inside Magazine did this article on us,
Marv Gardner.
Marv Gardner.
We could probably find that and put that on Family Search.
Oh, I've got
Actually,
that.
I've got it in my
Yeah.
file.
We've
I
got
guess I seem to recall
We've
it.
got-
And I've got the
That's
Tribune,
fine.
I've got a lot of news articles that have Mom and Dad's house in it.
Oh,
They run
really?
national news,
Oh, wow.
like the Channel 2, Tom Brokaw National News had Mom and Dad's house on it.
Okay.
And then they
Yeah,
did
if
come
you
by,
could collect those, that would be nice.
10 years after the flood, they came by and
That's
interviewed us and just wanted to know how things were 10 years later.
Yeah, there was an article.
So, anyway, that's kind of.
I have a funny story to tell you.
All right.
They, on the High Council was a psychiatrist. And so they sent the High Councilman in here to see if we were doing okay. I knew why he was here. And I said, now Sid, I'm gonna be able to handle this, aren't I? Because really it was, and he said, you are, as long as Dean doesn't sympathize with you. And so Dean has never sympathized again. Never.
And I think,
Oh, I have, you know,
I think you need
but
to
not
point
about
out,
the flood, not about the flood.
There you go.
I think you need to point out the house had just been paid for too,
Oh,
so it
yeah.
really.
And dedicated, we had just
And
dedicated it.
Yeah, it'd been dedicated. Oh, but anyway, it was an interesting experience, and we still have the,
So we had to remortgage too.
yeah, we had to remortgage, and that was interesting too. We sent papers in the Small Business Administration, who was, because it was under flood, so you sent it in the Small Business Administration. And I got this phone call from him, and he said, I just went through your application, and I'm calling you right now to tell you you're approved. But he says, I can't give you the low interest rate they keep talking about for the flood victims. He said, that's for people who already have a mortgage on the house. And now they have a second one. So their second one is a much lower rate, just because it comes under the disaster. But it says your house was paid for, and so we can't qualify you for the low rate. And I said, that's fine.
No, you
But-
said you mean you're punishing us then, because we paid all our debts. And he said, I'm sorry to tell you, but that's right.
But I have to tell you though, that we qualified for some flood insurance. You got back your income tax for the 3 years previous that you'd paid. And the federal government got that back to you really quick. You just went to an accountant, and he took off your income tax, made out the slip, and sent it in the government. They sent you the check back, and then they said, and then we'll be around to actually check out the house and everything later, but we don't wait to do that before we send you the check. So that's the way all that worked. And then some people that worked on the house we never got a bill from, and you know, so we lost a lot of money, but a lot of it we didn't have to remortgage for it because people just were very generous what they did. So that's a quick story on the flood.
Essentially.
Yeah, okay, and I want Mother to tell this story because I want it in Mom's words. But it's always been very touching to me, and I still think about it a lot. So, and that's the one I wrote the poem about. My only poem that ever got published was the flood poem. But so they had the house paid for. Yeah. So the house was paid for. It had been, and Mom and Dad, everything went into the house. This home was what they lived for, and it was gone. So Mom's standing on the front lawn, and it's gone, and a lot of people are just tearing the houses down because really, I stood here and thought, really, why are we bucketing this mud out? Let's just, start over. So, you tell the story of your thoughts on the front lawn about your ancestors, because these stories are important.
Well, I just remember thinking, I've always been really rather snobbish. Somebody told me I shouldn't use that word, about the fact that I had descendants on the Mayflower and that I had descendants that were pilgrims that walked across the plains. And so the thought went through my mind, you have always been so proud of them that if you can't take this now, you're really not worthy of it. And so, yeah, that did help me.
If they got through it, so can you.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to tell a story about meeting Elaine right the first time I stayed over here at their house. It's really short, but I got up in the morning and Elaine said, "Charles, what would you like for breakfast?" And I, being a little bit of a jokester, said, "Oh, steak and eggs." And so I didn't know she had it all, but she pulled out the steak and the eggs, and I kept saying, no, don't do this, don't do this. But my first breakfast here was steak and eggs. I'll never forget it. That's just Elaine for you.
And I knew the one that liked mandarin oranges. One of the son-in-laws she always had mandarin oranges for. I can't remember who it was. Okay, go ahead.
Although I think it's important to note for Mom and Dad, like with that funny thing where during the courtship between Mom and Dad, Mom didn't necessarily like Dad very much, but
Elaine liked me. That helped.
But you can tell that I was right now, can't you?
Exactly.
Again.
One thing too, a couple of people came out from work, from the office that next day and came out and said that the director of the Department of Transportation had got wind of, had been told about the destruction in your home and everything that you had. And so he said, the fellow said, so he told us to tell you that he's put you on administrative leave for 2 weeks, and which meant your salary's paid and everything. But and he said they don't want to see you for a couple of weeks, and let's see, because you're going to be needed there at the house. So I thought that was a nice gesture on his part too, just to do that. But it was people like Charles that came and helped us out. That's what helped us get through it all. But the time we got everything cleaned out and the yard cleaned up and the repairs done and everything, why, it was November before we got back in. But anyway, it was an interesting experience.
Were you in by Thanksgiving? Did you have Thanksgiving here?
I think so.
Yeah, we did.
That's great.
We did.
Didn't you live in the house down on Main Street,
I gave piano lessons down there.
Oh,
But we'd
so
go
you lived
between
with us.
Julian's and Marion's. We'd
That's
stay
right,
a while,
that's
and then
right.
we'd go
and
together.
taught down there, that's right.
Yeah.
I remember I got up at like 6 o'clock that morning and called all the girls and said, you're gonna see this on the news. I mean, I know you knew it because David was working so hard in Centerville. But you're gonna see this on the news, but I want you to know your dad and I are fine, and Lisa are all fine, but the house is a disaster, but we're okay. Because I thought, they'll get it on the news and they'll be worried. And of course, you were all there immediately. And Julene was very pregnant with Jared.
Mm.
This was in May and he was born in July, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was the last day of May. And actually his due date was June, so he was born in July. But
Actually, the way I mean, Centerville had already, their streets were already flooded, so we were kind of aware of the problem. But the way I found out is Barbara can't think of her last, Belknap, called me at like 4 a.m.
Oh, really?
and said, do you know where your mom and dad are? And when I said, no, is everything okay? She says, oh, haven't you heard? And that is how I found out. And then started climbing around and found out that he'd gone to the, well, and she told me that Dad had gone to the hospital. And then I started climbing around and Aunt Mary and I finally got hold of. But it was actually, that's how I first found out, was that phone
That's
call.
interesting.
Because they were looking for, they wanted to make sure you were okay.
Okay, so that's the flood story. Now tell something funny.
Okay, well, this is going to be an end of flood story. So I'm very pregnant with Jared, right? So Jared's born, and Mom comes in the delivery room with me, and everybody knows that Mom's lost her house and everything. So when Jared's born, it's the grandma who needs all the attention, which I agree with. I'm not knocking this, but when Jared was born and they take the baby, they hand him to Grandma, and I'm sitting there looking like, I want to hold him too. But Mother's the first one to hold Jared after he was born, and she's the one who talked to him, and she told him that he was going to love this world, how beautiful it was, and about the animals. And we all think that's what reason Jared to this day loves animals, is because his grandmother, when he was minutes old, was telling him all about it. But I remember her voice just talking to him, telling him all the wonderful things the world had to offer. And I didn't get to hold him for quite a long time.
You want to tell us about your other daughter, Ula?
Oh, Christine had a friend, Ula, and we would have to stop.
When she's little.
I know, when she was under 4, she had this close friend, and she'd be up above the door. She'd be funny places.
Imaginary.
Like,
Imaginary friend.
yeah, like the elf in the
Shell.
on the shell. But one time we were driving down the freeway, and Ula jumped out of the car, and we had to stop the car on the freeway and let Ula in. But as soon as Julian came, then Ula disappeared and never came again.
So I had a friend.
Oh, that's cute.
Well,
Raise your hands.
the only time I was ever involved in somewhat of a disaster, I guess we'd call it, I was really young, and I don't know how old, 6 or 7 maybe, something like that. But anyway, we and I and some friends, we were out playing and everything, and we used to have, there used to be a weed grow all through Bountiful, and it had a little, kind of a little pod type thing on it. And anyway, the common name of it was Indian tobacco. So one day we decided, well, if it's Indian tobacco, maybe we could smoke it. So we got some newspaper. We got some newspaper, and you could just run your hand down this, and it'd come off in fine. It'll look just like tobacco. So we made these cigarettes, and we were standing in June grass at the time, and so when you light it, it would just flame up, you know. You never smoked anything. It just you light the end of that, and it just go up in flames. And so we dropped it. Well, then the junior guys caught on fire, and we tried their best to get it out. The neighbors saw the fire, called the fire department, and the fire department came up and put it out. There was no buildings or anything involved, so we didn't. But we did get quite a dressing down for that, and none of us ever smoked after that.
Anything. No weed, right?
So anyway, that was one of the disasters of a young but
Sounds like it's a miracle we're all here today.
I had two nicknames as I was growing up. One was Steamboat, Little Steamboat. Little Steamboat was one, and Never Sweat was the other. Because we had the farm, and I did not like working on the farm. And that's where I garnered some of the workers and that, they called me, they gave me the nickname of Never Sweat, because I never quite worked up a sweat while I was on the farm. But what I loved to do though was when Dad would go into the market, the growers' market in Salt Lake, and that covered a full block practically from West Temple to first, well, now Second West, but and from 4th South to 5th South. That whole block was the growers' market, practically. And Elaine's dad had a wholesale. There was some large buildings down the back on the 4th South. And Elaine's dad had one of those buildings, and he brought in wholesale goods and then sold to the stores around in Salt Lake. We had a clientele, Dad had a clientele of these little corner markets around town. And I used to love to go in to the market. It was fun to be there, and also I didn't get to the farm till later in the day. We enjoyed that, or I enjoyed that very much, and
Mostly because he couldn't get to the farm.
yeah, because that got me off the farm early in the morning. The steamboat, Little Steamboat was there was one group of students that Dad was teaching at Davis High, and for some, they nicknamed him Steamboat Bill. And so they had all this group of boys called me Little Steamboat. That was my other nickname. But anyway, those were good old days. We had the farm. It's all in houses now, but that was part of it. So.
What did you tell a story about?
But this was a farming community when I grew up, 2,000 to 2,500
Spaghetti?
people all over here.
Which story?
Weren't you supposed to?
You keep
You told a story about
you keep
Christine
going. It's
and
getting hot in here.
Henry and I, but not Julie yet
It's
today.
okay. I
We
got a
told it.
spaghetti story the other day.
Yeah, we told the spaghetti story last time.
Julian has the story about the mouse.
The mouse.
Okay, well, we've heard how Andrea's eyes were so bad. Well, that's because they're like mine. So Andrea and I, we can see like this far ahead of us when we don't have our glasses on. So how old were we, Andrea?
Remember?
Not very old. So like, 6 and 12 or however we are apart. Anyway, so I'm starting in bedroom with Andrea, and we hear Guinevere making this noise, this funny noise.
Kind of from her throat.
Yeah, so we
This is
wake
your
up.
cat, right?
It's the cat, and we can tell it's the cat. We turn on the light, we can see the cat, and we can only see she has something in her mouth. But I'm like, Andrea, what's in the cat's mouth? I don't know. I can't see either. What is it? So we get off the bed. We have to get really this close to the cat. It's a mouse. She runs to the mouse. We scream. We jump on the bed. The cat runs. The mouse runs. We think we're gonna go get Dad. So it's the middle of the night. So we just think about it for a long time. So we decide we have to lock the cat and the mouse in the bedroom because we don't want it lost. So we make a leap from the bed into the hallway without touching the bedroom floor, slam the door shut, run upstairs, and we wake up Dad. Dad, there's a mouse in... No, girls, you're just dreaming. Go back to sleep. Dad, there's a mouse in the bedroom. I just put the cat out. The cat says, Dad! Finally, I just want to know, Dad, being the only man with a house full of women, finally went down, and sure enough, the cat brought the mouse to show Dad to. So, yeah. I just remember trying to wake Dad out of a deep sleep, and he was so sure we had had a bad dream, was trying to send us back to bed.
And that's another thing you should know is why Julene and Andrea are sleeping together. Because Christine and Julene couldn't get along.
I was her best friend after Uma.
That's right, after a while we were.
So we had to separate them, and then Andrea and Lisa slept together, and they got along pretty good.
I slept with Lisa, too.
And actually Andrea would come in, when I got my own room, she'd come in once in a while, and yeah. Julie never came in with the others.
I make up for it, I call her for help all the time now.
Well, yeah, Elaine and I, after we got married and everything, we figured that we were destined at birth to get married ultimately. We went all through school together. In fact, I didn't know just what we were doing tonight. I got the old school pictures out with us. We were always in the same class. When we graduated from the 9th grade, they picked one boy and one girl to give talks, and she was the girl and I was the boy. So we just kind of got, you know, different together. And when I guess was about my first date I ever went on was when I was in the Explorer Scouts. And, we were able to ask a girl to go on a date at one time, and up at Lloyd Parkins, right across the street from where I lived, and I asked Elaine, so she was the first date I ever had. So, but anyway, I didn't know just what we were doing tonight, but I did get out those old pictures, and I still have the graduation program from junior high.
Oh, do you?
It's not as fancy as today. It was mimeographed.
Was that Bountiful Junior?
Yeah.
Down.
Well, it was South Davis then.
But same old, same
Yeah.
spot.
There was South Davis and North Davis, and that was it.
Okay, should we let Caleb close this meeting?
Oh, should
No.
we close or?
No.
What this is, so I just snuck
Oh.
off to the other room and called up Uncle Jim. So I'm not sure how much of this we should go into.
All of it.
All of it.
No, a few of them, they're not necessarily stories as much as just general habits and memories that he would have. Like, for example, apparently there was a briar bush that would be his retreat place whenever his older sisters got mad at him,
Yeah.
that he'd run off to and hide into. Is that
That's
true?
true.
Apparently he'd run in and you guys would not follow him ever.
We couldn't get him.
Because where he'd go.
So this is your younger brother?
Elaine.
Mother's
Yeah, I'm
younger
the
brother.
Oh,
oldest.
your youngest. 'Cause I thought it was just
I'm the
girls.
oldest of 6,
Ah,
and he was the third born.
So there are two particular stories he did bring up. Well, one, in regards to when I asked kind of the character of Grandma, something that like probably on the more spiritual note of things, he talked about how Grandma Elaine has always been kind of seen as the mother hen figure of them, where when the siblings might maybe start to drift apart or go anywhere else, it was always Grandma Elaine that kind of held the activities that brought them all together and did what she could to keep the family united and together and have good relations kind of idea. So he talked about that. One of the stories he told me I should get from Steve Smedley for the full version because Grandma would cut this down a little bit. So Steve Smedley, apparently, did you teach him piano back in the day?
Uh-huh.
Do you know which story we're about to talk about?
No, I don't know, but I believe it. It's probably true.
Apparently about the fingerings for the piano, where apparently he got really, I guess, not super happy with him about not understanding
Go ahead,
these
say it.
fingerings.
She got mad.
She got mad. And apparently took a pen and wrote 1, 2, 3 on each of the fingers for each of them. That's one of Uncle Jim's kind of like the one he remembers of just humorously.
Mad about that?
No. I remember Mom writing on lots of people's fingers.
So
That's cute.
Oh, yeah.
he just thought that was a funny thing to remember. He said, but again, like you have to go to Steve Smedley and get it from him in order
The
to get
funny
this
thing
story.
is that Uncle Jim knows that happened to Steve. So Steve must have told
Must have-
Uncle
yeah,
Jim.
exactly. Something along those lines. But I
That
don't
is
know.
funny.
Want to elaborate on that at all? Or?
Well,
So is there a story about a frog?
Yeah, what's the frog in the bed?
Marion and I shared a bedroom, and I remember they put a frog or something in our bed once.
They being Jim and Stan, or?
Yeah, Jim and Stan is what I remember. Okay, there's my cat. Can you see how she's shaved and limping on that?
That's when Uncle Jim discovered the briar bush, I bet.
That could be.
That's probably one of the things.
Oh, that is so funny.
Okay, well, I have a cat story I think is funny. So when Mother had taught piano and the kids went on, we went from house to house for the Christmas recital.
Oh.
And so I would have like 4 piano students in the back seat and I would drive them to 3 different houses to perform. So it was fun because you know how fun it is to listen to children in the back seat in the dark when they don't think you're listening to them. So this is when the cats were little. They were tiny kittens. So this was the conversation. Don't you just love those kitties? Oh, I love the kitties. They can sit by your feet. I know. Don't you like it when they sit by the pedals? Yeah, but you never say anything. I know. Because as soon as you say something about the cat, Mrs. Holbrook goes, Dean, come get the cats. So you never say anything if the cats sit on the pedals. I know. I let them sit on my foot too all the time. That was the whole conversation.
And you always wondered why they didn't bring their feet up.
Yeah, they weren't pedaling.
Well, you know, Elaine became a nationally certified piano instructor. When they're in Utah, there just weren't, there weren't many around. In fact, I don't know how many there were. It couldn't have been over 1 or 2 when she and her friend went down to the university and went through the program and got nationally certified as piano teachers. And so she's always had a great reputation as a musician. And a lot of times the students would, I'd say, well, boy, you were a while getting to this music today. What was all the discussion? And said, well, the student just had something they wanted to discuss with me, and you know, a problem and so on. So she was a listening ear and a good guide to them. And but they'd come and talk to her when they maybe wouldn't want to talk to anybody else, but they knew their piano teacher would listen to them and give them some good advice. So.
Maybe something we can do to kind of start wrapping it up to keep going is we could almost do a miniature interview for each of the siblings and kind of their experience growing up in the household. And then maybe if you think of any particular events or something else of the sort that comes to mind, perhaps going from there.
Lisa was supposed to take violin from Jack Ashton, and she wouldn't do it, so Andrea stepped in very young. But,
Lisa would walk out the door to the first piano lesson, violin lesson.
You wouldn't do it, Lisa?
No, but I do remember when I was little, I remember this very well, Mother picking me up in her arms and showing me what a copper kettle was on the break front and teaching me to sing Raindrops on Roses. But I still
I know.
remember her picking me up in her arms and showing me and pointing to that copper kettle, and I remember looking at it. So I don't know, I could have been too big because I remember you picking me up.
And I remember, I wish I hadn't thrown it away, but I had a sheet of paper with all the pictures.
Yeah, I had
Raindrops.
it in the mudslide.
Raindrops
the
and
teacher,
the
the
roses.
words.
I had it in my scrapbook.
Well, isn't that one of the ones that we used to do when we'd perform, all of us?
With the dresses, the masks.
Yeah, see, I have
Yeah,
Actually,
good memories of that.
good memories,
Yeah,
early
me too.
memories
So
of
you
that.
would
I would have been,
Oh,
yeah.
you were little.
I think they should do it.
We actually had red velvet dresses.
Oh, he's seen it.
We've got a
Well,
picture
yeah,
of
that
them
picture
downstairs.
in the,
Yeah, you could have
Downstairs
been more
was-
than 6.
I think I was young. But we'd sing together, the
Oh.
4 of us.
Well, how about we do a little acapella? Oh, what do you think?
Absolutely.
That was
That's
then.
the only time I've sung.
And then later, we took a picture of you just before Andrea got married. And so
Christine's
we did
pregnant
the
with
same
him.
colored dresses, and that picture's in there.
Yeah.
And Christine does not have a belt on because she's pregnant with Jason.
Marianne.
Mary Ann, huh? Yeah, that's
Mary Ann.
right.
I remember we saying, how do you solve a problem like Andrea?
You
Yeah,
remember
we
that?
changed the name, that's true.
Yeah.
You know, I have an early memory, this is such a funny memory, and I couldn't have been more than maybe 3, but we lived in that little duplex down by Grandpa and Grandma Smedley. And there was a couch, I think it was gray,
Mhm.
and a big stuffed chair. And one night it was time to go to bed, and I would not go to bed. And I remember I just wouldn't go to bed, so Dad said to me, okay, stay up as late as you want, but we're gonna turn off the lights to go to bed. And I said, okay. So I sat in that gray chair in the dark, and I sat there, and I still remember Dad coming and saying, now you go to bed, you are not gonna sit here all night. I still remember it was weighing on him a lot more than me.
And you would have been little because we moved when you were 4.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have been more than 3. It's one of my earliest memories, but I just remember I didn't mind sitting in the dark, and he came storming back in.
David knows how obstinate, tenacious is the word I should use, isn't it?
See, I was a night person back then, but I just remember Daddy was trying to be so, use psychology.
Well, anyway.
We love these girls.
I just want to add one little thing. And that is, my father he went to a meeting, a Democratic meeting. They didn't have anybody to run for justice of the peace. They talked him into it. And so he became the justice, and he was elected. He was a school teacher, but he was the justice of the peace for Bountiful. That happened when I was in the 1st grade, and he didn't go out of office till I was my senior year in high school.
Wow.
12 years. But what I wanted to just say is, for a little boy growing up at 6 and 7, 8 years old through then, and have these policemen come, because court was in our dining room, and have these policemen come, and you be on a first name basis with them, and them in your home, and a lot of times I'd go in the living room and just listen to the court. But to a little boy growing up, I want to tell you, I was in 7th heaven with all the police going through the house.
That reminds me of a story, though, maybe. It seems like at Grandma's funeral, they talked about there was a murder in Bountiful. It was one of the first, And because he was justice of the peace, you had to keep all the evidence at your house, which made Grandma really nervous. Is that,
That's true. That's true.
where would he keep the evidence? Just,
I can tell you where it was. It was in a briefcase in the back of their closet. That's where he kept it. But he'd only been in office for 6 months.
oh, wow.
That was called the pig murder.
Yeah.
He went down to the Bountiful Cemetery, and then he saw a farmer and his wife just east of that in their garden, and he shot them and killed them both. And then someone else he shot.
Yeah.
Didn't he kill 3
Yeah,
people?
he killed somebody.
It's called the pig murder.
I don't know, he went to their home, and I think he shot him through the window or something.
He
but
didn't know them?
anyway.
It was just a random?
No. He didn't know him at all, and, but Dad had to really bone up on the law, because the hearing was held in the church.
Mm.
And but what happened was they had him analyzed and medically checked out, and they found out he had a brain tumor.
Oh.
And that's what had caused all this. So they Dad sentenced him to the hospital, the American Fort Hospital,
Mhm.
where he'd be taken care of and all. Couldn't be in jail for that. And he died there about 1 year from the date of the trial.
Is that where Provo gets its bad rap? If you think you're crazy, you're gonna end up in Provo.
I think it
But
is.
anyway, but I just wanted to tell you how fun it was for a little boy to have these policemen in the house all the time.
There you go.
I've got two of Dad's old dockets in them downstairs.
Well, Caleb, we're glad you get us together,
You had to send
even if we do too much
Ought
of
to
the
be
talking.
Andrea, you've got a couple
Well,
more.
that's
I
sorry.
have a
Ought to
couple
be a
of,
story or two more.
Oh, yeah.
Andrea's got one.
Mom's been-
well, I have a couple of, when I was thinking back on stories that I remember from the house. Like two in particular, every time I make mashed potatoes, I think of Mrs. Garwood. Because really, Mom and Dad were so kind to Mrs. Garwood, who was actually, so it was Aunt Norma Jean, Dad's sister. It was her mother-in-law. That was the connection to Mrs. Garwood. But she was the sweet, kind woman who, this was probably her only family. Everybody else was so far away. She was more blind than I, and but they were just so good to her. And I didn't understand back then why they would take her mashed potatoes when they'd go visit her. But now I realize that older people love mashed potatoes, and when you live alone, you're never going to make yourself a mashed potato. And so when Mother made a big Sunday dinner, she'd always set some aside for Mrs. Garwood, and we'd always take it to her apartment. So I think of that still when I mash potatoes.
That is interesting.
And then I have one other story that I remember. When I was in high school, I was going to play with the Bountiful High Orchestra that night. I was soloing, and I had taken out my contacts and was going to take a nap on the couch before the concert. And Mother, who'd gone around cleaning up, I put my contacts in a cup, and so she took the cup and then, washed the cup. And when I woke up, and I really am so blind, and I just knew it was hopeless. What would be the chance that she could, I think one contact was actually left in the cup.
I guess so.
Somehow, there was one contact still in the cup, but the
She
other.
only washed one cup, because you would have used two
Oh
different
yeah,
cups.
that must have been it. I put a contact in each.
Because
cup.
we used to use 2 cups.
Anyway, so I could keep in track. Anyway, but she just went to put her hand down in the disposal to see if just by chance there was a contact there, and she put her hand right on it and brought it up unscathed, unscratched, and I popped it in my eye and went to the concert. But just was so impressed that she was gonna go for it. She was gonna try and find that contact. I just knew there was no hope. I was, you know, and she just stayed really calm, went to the sink, and there it was in the disposal. So that's kind of my, I don't know, whenever I kind of get in a situation where I'm ready to abandon all hope, I think, nah, let's just go for it. Let's just see if we can work this out. Anyway, so those are 2 stories that I thought of.
I guess it explains why in Moscow you were always willing to go down into the depths of the sink to get your contacts.
I'll tell you, we've done that enough times over the years. In fact, Andrea lost her contact the night before she was going to take her endowments out. In our car, you were in our car, you know, and had put it in your mouth, and then all of a sudden it dropped. And we spent about 3 hours looking for the contact in the car before we found it. The night before she went to the temple for the first time.
Wow.
I remember that too.
Anyway, so we've had a few little contact issues.
Contact stories.
We never did find Julian's contact. You were sitting on the couch and lost it. We never could find it.
I know,
We
Mom,
went
but
through the magazines a page at a
And
time.
why would they fit in the magazine?
I know what. But see, Mom, the time you remember, it's the only time that you couldn't do it. You always pulled it
I know
off.
the hundreds of times we found the lens.
I know, so it was just one
Well,
set of
Lisa
bazillions.
has miracle stories about contacts.
Oh, I remember that one.
I don't.
I don't know
Tell
that
us.
story.
Isn't it the one when she's singing with the Mormon youth? Okay, Lisa's singing with the Mormon youth, and she has her contacts, and I don't remember the whole thing about the dress and whatever, but her contact flips out. And she's going through a difficult time in life right then, and you're making a lot of decisions. And so she's looking, and there's this concert, and it's the Mormon Youth Choir, and they're singing, and you can't just get down and look all over. And she's like, Heavenly Father, just, if I'm where I'm supposed to be and doing what I'm supposed to be, just help me know. And she looked, and there was the contact, and it was just, picked it up.
On her
It was
dress?
Right there. I can't remember, was it the dress or the floor? But it would have blended right in. But it was like, and it was like the Lord saying to her, you're okay, you're where you're supposed to be, and you're doing what you're supposed to do. Not that that's what she said to find the contact, but that had been going through her mind before she lost contact.
You were singing?
Yeah, it was a concert.
So,
I do believe, I won't bury my testimony, but I do believe the Lord knows the end from the beginning. And some of the things we go through, they're for a reason that sometimes we don't know for a lifetime, maybe never will, but I do think there's a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Is this?
Well, I did just think
Are
of
we
one
gonna
story that
finish it, or- Okay.
Andrea kind of reminded me of, and I don't know if Mom even remembers this, but it made an impression on me. When, I think we were in this house, and we moved here just before I turned 8, so that would have been about the time period. But they used to have people go around, and they'd come to your door selling things. And sometimes, I mean, they would just, I mean, there were people who they had no other way, I guess, of making money. Anyway, I remember this little old lady came to our door one day, and she was selling pins. You know how you get those little cardboard packets, and they're stuck just full of needles and pins? Well, that's what she was selling. She was just going to door selling them. And I still remember that Mom came to the door, and the lady had those, and Mom bought them. And then I remember Mom inviting her in to have some lunch. And I can still tell you, she had those little Vienna sausages and creamed corn, those 2 things I remember. But it was almost like Mom knew this lady. I mean, if she was selling pins to make money, she just didn't have anything. And the lady so willingly came in to eat and then went on her way. And I don't know if you even remember that. I don't know if you even knew her or just felt, you know, compassion for her. But I'll never forget that. Nowadays, we wouldn't dare invite anyone in, and nowadays people don't do that. But they used to come around selling things a little more often at the door.
Yeah.
Shoelaces and.
Shoelaces, yeah.
Kind of like your father took care of people like that. I heard stories.
Bountiful had a man that went around, Brother Peterson the peddler. Did any of you remember that story? He went around like she did, and everybody in Bountiful knew him.
Did he sell shoelaces? What did he
Yeah,
sell?
yeah, just things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember people doing that when I was younger. I just, but that lady I just happen to remember, and I do remember it was the needles. You know.
Kind of reminds me of the story about the guy who prayed that Jesus would visit him. And 3 people come to the door, beggars and so on and so forth, but Jesus never came. And then he said, and I was hungry, and you took me in and you fed me.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Mom and Dad have always been that way. I mean, let's face it, this house has always been a home that everyone felt welcome when they came.
That's true.
And their grandmother would be on the phone at midnight giving advice to people and to piano students, and Dad was always supportive. He let her do what she needed to do, and she supported him. And
He didn't sympathize, but he supported.
Only during the flood.
only during the flood. I know that's true, but it's true. And I, in talking to my kids about marriage, I use Mom and Dad all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah.
That ability to take care of people and what you just said is just rubbed off on you, I know.
But it's rubbed off on all of us.
It's
How we
exhausting. Truly, I mean, you know, I just think, how can they do this? You know, it's kind of going around with Elaine. After a little while, you feel like, oh, how am I going to keep up with her? You know,
You can't. You'll never keep up with Mom and Dad. I can do it.
They're both, yeah, they're just both so compassionate, so giving.
True.
You know.
And everybody always feels loved and cared for and respected.
Yeah. I always think of Dad as being such a diplomat because, you know, working for the right of way. I think of that man in Centerville on Main Street who they, you know, legally kind of were on opposite sides of the fence, but good friends. Good friends.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because the
Doing
sidewalk in
well.
Centerville went to his house, stopped, started.
You couldn't walk
He
on
was
his
not
lawn.
gonna sell that land.
He had junk all over
The
the
junk
front yard.
all over. But he had a lot of respect for Dad, and Dad always treated him so kindly. You know, they might have been on opposite ends on the legal part, but there was never animosity. I just remember that he had such respect for Dad, and Dad was so kind to him, so kind.
Yeah,
So.
he is.
No, he has these really good.
It really
So,
was
Dad,
the
it's
last
okay.
home to get sidewalk in front of their house.
It's okay, Dad, that you didn't like to garden because it's people you're good.
Yeah, you good with
you're
people.
a people gardener.
That's right. You grow good people.
I was never really sure when to end because I feel like we
I
always
know,
have
is
another
that
story.
any
but
other-
are we-
Lisa, any stories? Okay.
All right.
Okay,
Okay.
Caleb.
Alrighty. Well,
Fun.
thank you everyone for coming again.
Well, thanks, Caleb,
Yeah,
for
that
pulling
was
all this
way
together.
This is always
So,
fun. What are we
I
doing
agree.
next time?
Yeah, I was gonna say so we've interviewed Grandma and Grandpa and gone through the stories. Like
We're going to talk about
we
us.
could do a number of things. I
We'll
had
be
an
gone.
idea.
Yeah, we're
Um,
gonna be gone the next
I know
time.
that there's Grandpa. You had